We're flying short-haul business on the UK's two biggest airlines. First up today, we're on EasyJet, which is actually the UK's biggest airline in terms of passenger numbers. Now, EasyJet doesn't technically have a business class, but you can get a pretty similar, or perhaps even better experience than European short-haul business class by flying with EasyJet and just paying for the extras, or at least that's what we'll try and find out. Next up, we'll fly British Airways, the nation's flag carrier, and the second largest British airline in terms of passenger numbers. That BA business class ticket does include more as standard, so you'll get your lounge access, your meal and a few drinks without having to pay any extra, but that base fare will be more expensive than EasyJet. So let's find out which gives the best experience overall and which offers the best value. Let's get going. Now for the EasyJet flight, I'm going hand luggage only, so there was no need to head over to the check-in counters today, but I did take a look and the queue was looking very quiet anyway, and that's both for the standard queue and the speedy boarding check-in line. Check bags aren't included in the EasyJet base fare and are an extra charge at around £20 each way, although it does vary from flight to flight. A small personal item to carry on is no extra charge, but for a larger carry-on like mine, you're going to have to pay. Again, the cost of that can vary, but you're typically looking around £20 to £30 a flight for a large carry-on, but that does include speedy boarding and an express check-in line. But I get these features for no additional charge thanks to our EasyJet Plus membership. This membership also grants us fast track security, whereas if you didn't have the membership, you need to fork over an extra £7 per person here at Newcastle, which from experience is absolutely not worth it. Today was no exception, with the fast track queue ending up being a lot longer than the standard queue. Lounge access is not available with EasyJet, but you can purchase access to the Aspire Lounge here in Newcastle for £44. However, our access today is no extra charge thanks to the priority pass that we have with our Amex Platinum cards. The Aspire Lounge in Newcastle is a very nice space. It went through a renovation last year and there's now two sections. Priority Pass gets you access to the right hand side, which is fairly basic, and then if you have business class with other airlines you can get into the left hand side, which is a bit nicer. I was able to grab some breakfast here and a coffee. Unfortunately the quality of the food is pretty basic here, you're not getting anything fancy, but it did at least fill me up and I was able to get some much needed caffeine ahead of this morning flight. Making our way over towards the gate, speedy boarding does allow us to skip the queue to be able to get on first. But that doesn't mean you're prevented from having to wait around in a seated area at the gate first. Thankfully there was at least a much bigger section for those of us with speedy boarding. The rest of the passengers were made to be crammed into quite a small space, whereas there was tons for us in speedy boarding. Rather than feeling like a premium feature for us, it just kind of felt like they were treating other passengers quite poorly to make people more inclined to pay for speedy boarding in the future. And after about a 15-minute wait at the gate, we were finally able to go and board the plane. As much as jet bridges can be convenient when the weather isn't great, I do quite like being able to walk out on the tarmac and get a view of the plane before climbing the stairs to get on board. And we very quickly took our seats in the front row. On short-haul European business class, most airlines will block out the middle seat, but because this isn't a true business class, that's not done here on EasyJet. That said, they will allow you to book the seat next to you if you want to ensure that that's kept free, but you will have to pay the cost of that seat. Our flight today wasn't looking too full, so it took a bit of a gamble that we'll be able to get a spare seat, which did pay off as you'll see soon. The seat itself is pretty basic, there's no real comfort to it, it's a pretty hard surface and it's a pretty old seat as well, this one. In the front row, the tray table folds out from the armrest if you can eventually get it out, and each seat has individual reading lights and air vents. Taking a look at the menu, food options are an extra cost, but most are very affordable and pretty substantial. There's even a selection of cocktails that can be purchased relatively cheaply. Now for this outbound flight today, I didn't choose to eat as I was pretty full from the lounge, but I have tried the food on board in the past and I found it alright. Not fancy dining or anything, but perfectly nice food and substantial for what you're paying. And this is one of the perks of going with an airline like EasyJet. If you don't want something, you don't have to pay for it. I got myself comfortable for takeoff and I was enjoying the amount of space that I had in front of me in the front row here, but I couldn't help but notice that in the row behind, and a couple of rows behind actually, they were completely empty. So as soon as we got in the sky, I decided to relocate myself over to row 2, where I had the whole row to myself. And now we can have something that feels a bit more like what you get in European business class, where the seat in the middle is usually blocked out. Now obviously if I had a stranger in seat C, I wouldn't be stretching across the seats like this, but I would stretch out a little bit or at least be able to take up a bit more space. The seats are basically the same here as they are in row 1, with the exception that you do get the in-seat pocket rather than the one on the wall, and the tray table folds down from the seat. And I was glad to be at the window to get the views before going to check out the loo. Just your bog standard airplane loo here, there's nothing special, nothing fancy, but nothing bad either, nice and clean. And the flight went by very quickly. Granted, it is a very short flight anyway, only clocking at around 35 minutes, but when you've got that level of comfort of having the space next to you, it just makes it feel even quicker, especially when I got to check out all the views on the way in. Although I didn't go for any of the food or drink on board, the crew seemed very friendly and they did make their way down the cabin offering food and drink to anyone who wanted to purchase. And I was quite surprised to see quite a few people getting on the booze on such an early morning short flight. But hey, no judgment here, I've done plenty of morning boozing on airplanes before. Just wasn't feeling it today. We'd actually landed into Belfast a little bit early today, and again because we hadn't checked any bags, we were very quickly through, on the ground, through the airport and off to go pick up our rental car. Overall, really pleasant flight that with EasyJet, had plenty of space. Obviously it definitely helped to have the whole row to myself, but you can always book out that seat next to you to get some extra space if you need it. And that would then bring the cost pretty comparable to our next airline, British Airways. Let's see what they're like. Back at Newcastle Airport for another morning flight, although thankfully this one was a few hours later than the EasyJet flight had been the previous week, so we were arriving a little bit less tired. The flight was at the start of a longer holiday, so we did actually have checked luggage this time, so that meant that there was actually a need to head to the check-in desks. And the business class queue seemed to be taking a while this morning. Just the one desk compared to the two that they had for economy, but they were actually letting people in the economy queue go ahead of us in the business class queue, which was a bit odd. And there were people that joined the economy queue about the same time that we joined the business class queue who got seen much sooner than we did. As business class passengers, you're entitled to up to 2 32 kilo bags, but we're bringing a lot less than that today. And once checked in, we made our way through security, and BA includes fast track security with Club Europe bookings. And once through, it was time to head over to the lounge. BA used to operate their own lounge from Newcastle, but that's sadly long gone, and Aspire now occupy that same space within the Lux and Suite sections of their lounge. Business class with BA grants access to that Lux section. And that Lux section is definitely a nicer lounge overall, definitely gets more natural light as well, and plenty of nice seating options. The food though is very similar to what you experience on the other side that we visited for the EasyJet flight. The main difference is you do get slightly nicer crockery and 1 or 2 minor additional items, but nothing game changing. As it was a slightly later departure today, I'd had time to eat at home and I knew food would be included on the flight, so I didn't go too crazy on the food. But overall, a nice pleasant space to just relax, grab a coffee or two and wait until it was time to get on board. And I do like to get the seats where you can see the windows so that you can spot when the plane's arrived, when they've finished disembarking, and that's how you know when it's time to make your way over to the gate. They always use the same gate here in Newcastle, so you can pretty much just head on over as soon as the plane's there, and not need to wait for that boarding announcement. Unlike EasyJet, BA use jet bridges, which is very handy when it's raining outside like it was today, and it also means that boarding passengers who need assistance goes a lot faster too. The seats up here are in the same layout as an economy in a 3-3 layout, but that middle seat is blocked out, which does give you a good bit of extra space. But obviously nowhere near what you get in some regions of the world when you book a business class short haul flight. There's a comfortable adjustable headrest, which is definitely a step above the EasyJet seats, but a lot of the rest of it is pretty similar, with a tray table that folds out from the armrest, individual air vents and reading lights above, and a similar amount of legroom, maybe slightly better on the BA flight. Wi-Fi is available on the flight, including free messaging, and there's also power outlets underneath the seat. Boarding didn't take too long, and before long we were starting to get on our way. And once we'd pushed back and had the safety demonstration, the cabin crew came around with the menus for today's flight. Club Europe business class passengers receive an included meal, as well as soft drinks, hot drinks, and of course alcoholic options. It was a morning flight and I hadn't intended to drink, as you might have guessed from my slightly judgmental comments on the EasyJet flight, but I may have changed my mind on that once we got in the air. In my defence, this was definitely more of a late morning flight than an early morning one. But let's get up in the air and start that onboard service. Once up in the air, the very friendly cabin crew came around to take our orders. I went for the full English breakfast, whereas Kelly decided to try the quiche. And I decided why not have a glass of champagne with it as well. Kelly wasn't going to, but a little gentle persuasion from the crew made her decide to get one as well. And it was a very nice glass too. The food, however, was a little bit less impressive. Kelly really enjoyed her quiche, to be fair, but for my meal, the sausage and bacon were average, and the rest of the hot food was no good at all. I'm sure it doesn't help that I'm not a big fan of mushrooms and tomato, but that supposed egg is definitely not something you want to be eating. At least there was a nice croissant to finish things off though. Do you need a meal on a short flight like this? No, probably not. But it was nice to be served something. I made a quick pit stop in the bathrooms. They're nothing special here, but they are slightly nicer than what you get on EasyJet and also what you get in economy with BA, with some nice white company soap. And also a little bit of decoration too. When I got back to my seat, I found that the crew had proactively topped up my champagne. Then, when I was halfway through drinking that, they came round again and offered me another top up. And then about 5 or 10 minutes later, when the captain announced we'd be 10 minutes to landing, they then brought over a plastic cup so that we could keep drinking whilst landing, and then topped that up again to finish off the bottle. Whenever a bottle's open on these short flights, if they don't get it finished, they end up just pouring it away, so they're often quite keen to proactively offer it to anyone who's had a glass. Generally speaking, the service on this flight was absolutely brilliant. I'm not just saying that because they kept plying me with alcohol. They were friendly, attentive and efficient. And it is that level of service that really does differentiate this from what you get on the likes of EasyJet. To be honest, I'd started these journeys expecting to reach the conclusion that you can basically get the exact same thing if you just pay for the extras on the budget airlines. But what I actually found is that I did enjoy that experience on BA a lot more, and it is just that level of proactive service that you get. Even if you were paying for a meal and a drink on EasyJet, you're only going to see the cabin crew once when they deliver that. They're not going to be coming back to do any kind of repeat service. And additional perks like a generally better lounge experience or greater luggage allowance can also make a difference too. So for a similar price, I do think you will get a better experience on BA than you will on EasyJet. But EasyJet does of course have that massive advantage that you only need to pay for those benefits that you actually want. I previously tried to create a first class experience on Ryanair, and if you want to see what that is like, watch this video next.